The biggest tank battle in history, you say? Oh, that's what everybody says, huh? Well, someone should really get over there and cover it as it unfolds. I should do it. Well, I guess I'm free. Well, where am I going? Prokhorovka in the Soviet Union. Cool. July 1943, Belgorod Oblast in the Soviet Union. The Battle of Kursk is raging, and 3 heavily armored SS Panzer Grenadier divisions are bearing down on you. It looks like they might break through at any time. If that happens, Kursk might be next, and the whole front with it. It's time to stop the Axis in their tracks. It's time to defend the motherland. It's time for the Battle of Prokhorovka. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II in real-time miniseries on the Battle of Prokhorovka. Over the next 6 weeks, starting today, we're going to be covering this battle, one of the most well-known battles in the entire war, and one of the most well-known tank battles in military history. On July 12, 1943, the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army launches a counterattack against the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Hundreds of tanks battle it out in a hellscape of smoke, flame, and chaos. Infantrymen clash in trenches, hurling grenades and firing off submachine guns at close quarters, while artillery and bombs rain down everywhere. It is described by many as the largest tank battle of the war, and the Battle of Prokhorovka goes down in legend as the moment when the Red Army destroys the elite of the German Panzer Force. That's the legend. But as we shall see, the reality is much more complicated. In this prelude today, I'll set the scene for the actual battle, giving you the wider picture and laying out some of the fighting leading up to the actual clash, which happened on July 12, 1943. Okay, the Battle of Prokhorovka is itself part of the wider Battle of Kursk. I covered that week by week in the regular series, beginning with the planning stages, of course, but I will just quickly run through it again since that was 2.5 years ago. Eastern Front, early 1943. By now, things are not going all that well for the Germans. The initial 1941 successes of the invasion of the Soviet Union are distant memories, replaced by repeated setbacks, heavy losses, even the loss of a whole army at Stalingrad. By mid-March 1943, the Germans have been pushed back to lines which are not that far from those they occupied in the winter of 1941. Faced with an enemy that has a seemingly endless supply of troops and tanks, the German army's logical course of action is one of strategic defense. In fact, in February 1943, Adolf Hitler says that he is unable to undertake any large-scale operations this year. But Hitler changes his mind, and on March 13th, he gives the order for another major Eastern operation, although one with far more limited goals than those of 1941 and 1942. Codenamed Operation Citadel, this is to be a pincer attack on the salient that has developed around the city of Kursk, around 250 kilometers from north to south and 160 from east to west. Success here would achieve a few different objectives. It would cut off and destroy large numbers of Soviet troops before they could launch a summer offensive. It would reassert German strength and prestige, especially in the eyes of the other Axis nations. It would also straighten the front. For their part, the Soviets have seen this operation coming a mile away. I mean, you only have to look at the massive bulge on the map to see the obvious opportunity here. So they've built up a huge system of defensive fortifications with minefields, anti-tank ditches, and concealed anti-tank guns. Their plan is to absorb the attack, drain the enemy, and then launch counteroffensives to smash the weakened German forces. After numerous delays, Operation Citadel finally goes ahead on July 5th. Gunther von Kluge's Army Group Center forms the northern pincer, that's Walter Model's 9th Army and Walter Weiss's 2nd Army. Erich von Manstein's Army Group South is the southern pincer and features Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army and Werner Kempf's Army Detachment Kempf. These German forces face off against the Soviet Western Front under Vasily Sokolovsky, the Bryansk Front under Markian Popov, Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front, and Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh Front. In reserve, the Soviets also have the Steppe Front under Ivan Konya. The Steppe Front is to go into battle when the time is right for counteroffensive. You should go back and watch a special episode I did on the actual Kursk deployments for the full details of all of these forces. Needless to say, Kursk sees an enormous number of men, tanks, guns, and planes go into battle. On the German side, close to 800,000 men, 3,000 tanks and armored fighting vehicles, AFVs, 9,000 artillery pieces and mortars, and about 2,000 planes. On the Soviet side, 1.9 million men, 5,000 tanks and armored fighting vehicles, almost 30,000 guns and mortars, and up to 3,500 planes. I won't tell you the story of the battle again. You can watch weeks 202 and 203 for that. For the purposes of this miniseries, we're interested in the southern pincer, which makes better progress against the Soviet defensive belts than the northern pincer. Within this southern pincer, we're focusing on the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, part of Hoth's army. Under the command of SS Obergruppenführer und General der Waffen-SS Paul Hauser, this corps features 3 Waffen-SS Panzergrenadier divisions, Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. By this point in the war, they are some of the most powerful divisions Germany has, fielding a total of almost 500 tanks and other armored vehicles as of July 5th. When Kursk begins, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps makes good progress. By the second day of the offensive, they have broken through the 2nd Soviet defensive line, and the most advanced units have reached Kalinin. That's 25 kilometers through the minefields, ditches, and other obstacles, and they're just 17 kilometers away from the town of Prokhorovka. Prokhorovka isn't actually a target of the original plan, but on the 9th, Hoth adjusts his overall plans because of slow progress elsewhere and orders Hauser to drive for the town. So on July 10th, the 3 SS divisions are advancing northeast on Prokhorovka. Totenkopf are on the left, Leibstandarte in the middle, Das Reich on the right. The objectives are for Totenkopf to get across the river Psel and establish a bridgehead on the other side. Ultimately, Hauser wants the Totenkopf division to advance northeast along the uplands across the Psel before swinging around and hitting Prokhorovka from the northwest. After heavy fighting against Soviet units of the 52nd Guards Rifle Division, the 99th Tank Brigade from 2nd Tank Corps, and elements of the 11th Motorized Rifle Brigade, Totenkopf's Panzer Grenadiers managed to establish their bridgehead. But their bridging units are slow to come forward, so the division will not be able to begin bringing its armor across this day. Leibstandarte spend the 10th advancing along the road to Prokhorovka. They're facing off against the rest of 2nd Tank Corps, which in this sector has the 26th Tank Brigade and the 15th Guards Heavy Tank Regiment. There are also the 285th and 295th Rifle Regiments of the 183rd Rifle Division here. The 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment is aiming for the Soviet strongpoint at Komsomolets State Farm, which is located pretty close to where the main road and railway line to Prokhorovka meet before running together northeast towards the town. Supported by Stug assault guns, Panzer IVs, and the Nebelwerfer Regiment, the Panzer Grenadiers attack the farm. This position was very strong, with an anti-tank ditch in front and a company of dug-in T-34s in support. When the Panzer Grenadiers approached, they came under heavy fire, and the attached pioneers could not move forwards to breach the obstacle. Eventually, 4 Tigers were brought forward, and they methodically suppressed one Soviet tank and gun position after another. After taking the farm, Leibstandarte assaults Hill 241.6 next, the next dominant terrain feature, taking the hill shortly after nightfall. Then they dig into new positions extending from the railway line to the hill. The Das Reich division is to protect the Corps' right flank, and they spend the day grappling with the 4th Guards Tank Brigade. Das Reich has the 1st Battalion of the Deutschland Regiment pushing towards Yasnaya Poliana, and the regiment's 3rd Battalion reaching the railway junction at Ivanovsky Viselok. The battalion continues attacking southeast from there, and the foremost elements are able to reach Vinogradovka about 1.5 kilometers away. But most of the unit is unable to advance beyond the railway line because of heavy anti-tank defenses. Later in the evening, the Soviets throw the 25th Guards Tank Brigade into the battle, and it manages to push Das Reich back and re-establish the Soviet line along the railway track. Limited gains for Das Reich, but they have managed to ensure the safety of the right flank. By now, the Soviet leadership is worried about the rapid progress of the Corps. Voronezh Front Commander Nikolai Vatutin decides they must launch a counterattack to turn back the SS. However, he's already deployed much of his operational reserve, so he must draw on the steppe front for his forces. specifically the 5th Guards Tank Army under Pavel Rotmistrov. Rotmistrov will later recount the meeting he has at Vatutin's front headquarters. The front commander invited me closer to the map and, pointing with a pencil at the Prokhorovka region, said, "Having failed to penetrate to Kursk through Oboyan, clearly the Hitlerites have decided to shift the axis of their main blow farther east, along the rail line to Prokhorovka. Thus, Pavel Alexeyevich, we have decided to oppose the SS tank divisions with your tank guardsmen, to deliver a counterstroke against the enemy with 5th Guards Tank Army." The night of the 10th, Rotmistrov begins to move his forces into position. But these preparations are threatened in the morning when Hauser's forces renew their drive. The morning of July 11th brings heavy rain. As it falls, Leibstandarte's Panzer Grenadiers start trudging across the fields to continue their advance on Prokhorovka. The 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment leads the way. Together with 4 Tiger tanks, they are to advance parallel to the railway and take Hill 252.2 on the Oktyabrski State Farm, which are about 5 kilometers southwest of Prokhorovka. The division is then to gather its Panzer Grenadiers, its reconnaissance battalion, and its Panzer Regiment of Panzer IVs and lunge forward to take the town. Meanwhile, Totenkopf is to advance northeast from its bridgehead across the Psel, overrun the Soviet artillery positions ahead of it. Das Reich is to remain on the defensive, covering the Corps' right flank and sending reinforcements in case of success. Things kick off around 5 a.m. The rain delays the start and prevents early air support, and the Panzer Grenadiers face stiff resistance not just from the 2 regiments of the 183rd Rifle Division, but also from the 26th Guards Airborne Regiment from the 9th Airborne Division, which has fortified positions on both sides of the railway line. The tanks and anti-tank guns of Alexei Popov's 2nd Tank Corps also give support. Leibstandarte's Tiger tanks are well equipped to deal with the Soviet tanks and anti-tank positions, but the division has but 4 of these armored beasts. Under this heavy fire, including Soviet artillery from Prelestonoye, the Panzer Grenadiers are limited to making small jumps forward. As they close in on Hill 252.2, Hans Becker's 1st Battalion of the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment runs into a massive anti-tank ditch defended by a minefield. About 8:30 a.m., he calls forward the pioneers to clear a path. They set to work under heavy fire from Soviet troops, mortars, and artillery, though they do actually have some smoke rounds for cover. Once the pioneers clear the way through, the Panzer Grenadiers clear the anti-tank ditch, and the tanks are able to continue moving forward. In a stroke of good fortune, the Germans manage to capture a bridge over the anti-tank ditch intact. By about 9 a.m., the Germans are continuing their advance towards Hill 252.2, taking heavy fire from Soviet paratroopers as they go. The fighting is tough until the division's Panzer Regiment, equipped with Panzer IVs, joins in. At 9:05 hours, after the artillery, Stukas, and Werfers had done their lethal work, Leibstandarte resumed its advance. Its 2nd Battalion, 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, supported by Tiger tanks and assault guns, quickly pushed on towards Hill 252.2, where at 0950 hours it ran into intense fire from the 26th Guards Airborne Regiment's 2nd Battalion and from Soviet positions covering Oktyabrski State Farm. At 10:15 hours, the division's Panzer Group joined the attack, and finally, at 13:10 hours, it captured the precious and now blood-soaked crest of the hill. The 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment, which is led by Joachim Peiper and rides in half-track armored personnel carriers, also assists in the fighting on the hill. German victory at Hill 252.2 comes around 2:10 in the afternoon. After this, Leibstandarte's Panzer Regiment wastes no time and begins attacks on Oktyabrski State Farm. The fighting at the State Farm on the 11th is very poorly documented, and there are lots of conflicting accounts which try and fill the gaps. But it seems that after a long and intense fight, the Panzers and Panzer Grenadiers clear the farm by the evening. From there, the 3 battalions of the 2nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment take advantage of Soviet fortifications and dig themselves into defensive positions at the farm and on the hill. Meanwhile, the 2 battalions of the 1st Panzer Grenadier Regiment are continuing their day's work of clearing Soviet forces from the village of Storozhevoye on the right flank, fighting some of the remaining elements of Popov's 2nd Tank Corps south of the railway. Leibstandarte are now just 3 kilometers or so from Prokhorovka. But things aren't at all rosy. For starters, they were meant to have actually taken the town today. And they also now occupy a precarious position, holding a long, thin finger of ground pointing up towards Prokhorovka, with the tip of the finger terminating at their positions at Oktyabrski State Farm and Hill 252.2. On the left, they still have Soviet positions on the banks of the Psel and around the villages of Andreyevka and Prelestonoye. On the right flank, the Stalinsk State Farm and the village of Yamki are still in enemy hands. Things haven't been so great for the Leibstandarte's 2 sister divisions either. Over at the Psel bridgehead, Totenkopf's day gets off to a bad start, with the bridging units failing to complete the installation of the necessary bridges until after 2 in the afternoon. Then at 4:15, the division announces that the riverbanks, the ground, and the roads leading out of the bridgehead are too damp, and the tanks will just get stuck if they try and cross. This is not just bad weather though, this is also bad planning. The failure to bring the bridges forward is hard to explain. It's not as if the Psel River should have come as a surprise to the Germans. They had known since the beginning of the operations that they needed to cross it. They observed the river on the 9th, and they planned on crossing on the 10th, yet they did not get the bridges built until after 2 p.m. on the 11th. There was an abundance of bridging units, with the SS Panzer Corps having 5. The bridging units should have been with Totenkopf when they first arrived at the Psel. On top of that, not being able or prepared to deal with the soft ground and the embankment on the opposite side of the river was also poor planning. The blame for this slow river crossing probably lies with the Corps commander and the division commander. The Psel is really more of a creek than a river at this point on the map, but its shallow waters have now successfully held back the Totenkopf's panzers for a day, and the division will not start bringing their tanks over the river until late this evening. Deprived of their armor, the Totenkopf Panzer Grenadiers spend most of the day immobile, while the 52nd Guards Rifle Division, 95th Guards Rifle Division, and the 99th Tank Brigade launch probing attacks against the bridgehead. On the Panzer Corps' right flank, Das Reich have made a little progress. The 2nd Battalion of the Deutschland Regiment completes the clearance of Ivanovsky Wieselok, but cannot complete the drive to Vinogradovka. By the end of the day, the 25th and 26th Guards Tank Brigades are assembled there, while the 4th Guards Tank Brigade is still holding the line from Belanichino to Ivanovka. The 6th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade is also in position nearby, defending Belanichino. On the Soviet side, Rotmistrov spends the evening of July 11th putting the finishing touches to the attack he plans to launch tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. The bulk of his forces are 3 tank corps, the 18th under Boris Bakharov, the 29th under Ivan Kirichenko, and the 2nd Guards under Alexei Burdeny. He also has Popov's 2nd Tank Corps, although they've been pretty thoroughly chewed up in the fighting here the past couple days, and they are bordering on combat ineffective. In total, the 4 corps that Rotmistrov plans to send into battle count around 600 tanks. There are also a whole load of other units attached, like airborne regiments, motorized rifle regiments, and artillery and anti-aircraft guns. I will go over these in detail, along with the battle plans of both Rotmistrov and Hauser next week. As the day ends on July 11th, the Battle of Prokhorovka is mere hours away. I think I'm going to enjoy doing these miniseries, and I imagine you will too. To get ever more of them in future, join the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That is what allows us to do this. Martin Gray is the TimeGhost Army Prokhorovka pal this week, and these are the newest Army officers. And if you want to see that Battle of Kursk deployment special, you can click right here for that. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.